Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. July 27th, North Korea is expected to celebrate that day to mark the 70th anniversary of signing the armistice agreement. Satellite images have already shown that Pyongyang appears to be preparing for a military parade, and eyes are on what kind of weaponry is going to be on display. Meanwhile, Seoul and Washington are likely to hold the inaugural session of the newly launched Nuclear Consultative Group in Seoul this month. For the latest updates regarding North Korea, we invite into the studio Doctor Go Myong-hyun, Senior Fellow at Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome.
Good to be here.
And we also have Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Klingner, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, Dr. Go, first question to you. Images suggest the regime could be preparing for a military parade for July 27th. Now, first of all, what is celebrated on that date? And does this year in particular have significant meaning?
So July 27th is supposed to be the day that the two sides in the Korean War signed the armistice agreement that put an end, or temporary end, to the war back in 1953. But then, whereas this is an armistice day, a suspension of combat for South Korea elsewhere in the world, for the North Koreans, they celebrate this day as a day of victory for the country. So Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, claimed that the Korean War was a victory for North Korea because he justified this stalemate as a victory by saying that North Korea has been able to essentially prevent the United States from taking over the Korean Peninsula. But then there are many anniversaries in North Korea that they use the occasion for celebration, as well as mounting parades. But this particular day started receiving more spotlight once Kim Jong-un came into power. For some reason, Kim Jong-un wants to make the July 27th as a special day for him, and he puts more emphasis on this day than compared to his predecessors. And that's the reason why I think a lot of watchers are paying attention to what Kim Jong-un has in mind for this particular day, especially in terms of provocations as well as parades, because with provocations, we know that North Korea had a failed space vehicle launch, Cheonrimal launch, a couple of months ago. But then North Korea also uses the occasional parades to showcase new weapon systems. So there's some expectation that Kim Jong-un might mark this year's July 27th as an occasion to show more threats or showcase more of new weapon systems, as well as betray some of the strategic intentions that he has for this year.
Right, I see. It's interesting to hear how North Korea considers this day as a day of victory. Now, Mr. Klingner, usually we were able to see, latest arsenal during the military parades. That being said, what types of new weaponry have been unveiled during past military parades up until now, and what could we expect this year?
Well, North Korea has often unveiled particularly new missiles, whether intercontinental ballistic missiles or intermediate or short range, during a parade. Now, sometimes those are the first time we've seen an indication of a new weapon system. Other times they've either tested the weapon system ahead of time or we've seen it on satellite imagery. So during the last big parade in February, they unveiled a large number of the Hwasong 17 and Hwasong 18 ICBMs. Now, we don't know of any newer ICBM, but it very well could be that they display a large number of those ICBMs and a number of shorter range. They can always surprise us by unveiling a missile system that we didn't know about, whether it's a submarine launch missile or other. So we look with great anticipation for every major military parade because we don't know whether we're going to be surprised with some new weapon system or not.
Right, I see. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, Dr. Go, apart from new weaponry that could be unveiled, should we expect to see another satellite or missile launch to take place?
Well, that's what North Koreans are promised to do. Not for this particular day, but then they promised in the aftermath of the failed launch last month that they would essentially carry out another launch. And then we know that North Korea had prepared the second launch right after the failed launch, but that they didn't carry out what they are promised to do. So there's an anticipation that the North Koreans might do that to mark the July 27th anniversary this year. So that's the reason why there are a lot of eyes on North Korea right now. And then there's some, I guess, an argument in favor of expecting this particular launch for July 27th. The reason is because we believe that North Koreans tried to time the launch of the first space vehicle to coincide with the plenary meeting in North Korea for the North Korea's Workers' Party, because there's some expectation that North Korea might have wanted to use the success, quote-unquote, success of the space vehicle launch to use as a backdrop of the plenary meeting, which was probably filled with messages that would encourage the people of North Korea to work harder because the overall economic situation is not too good.
Right.
So the same logic probably applies to upcoming July 27 celebrations. So that's the reason why North Korea might want to. I mean, we believe North Korea might want to have another go at the space vehicle launch, and then also there's a reason. Another reason to expect North Korea to launch a space vehicle is because North Korea has been quite quiet in the last couple of months in terms of provocations, in terms of sending message to the outside world. And even Kim Jong-un himself have been pretty much absent from the public eye. So I think North Korea might want to make up for this relative absence by coming out with a event like this.
Right. So there is high possibility that North Korea could go on with provocations of any kind within this month. Right. Now, Mr. Klingner, meanwhile, Seoul and Washington are working on holding their inaugural meeting of the new Nuclear Consultative Group this month. What discussions are expected to take place?
Well, the meeting will be to implement or operationalize this new Nuclear Consultative Group, which Presidents Yoon and Biden agreed to and announced during their April summit. So in talking with both U.S. and South Korean officials, what they're trying to do is put meat on the bones of this new group. And they're trying to identify ways to improve coordination, even South Korean involvement in some of the decision-making for U.S. use of nuclear weapons in a Korea conflict. Of course, the U.S. retains sole command and control over its nuclear weapons. But in order to not only deter North Korea, but also to reassure South Korea, the U.S. and South Korea have had a lot more discussion, a lot more transparency on U.S. nuclear deterrence and nuclear doctrine in the last several months. When I was in Korea in January, there was even a sense of conflict of South Korea perhaps pushing for an indigenous nuclear weapons program. And in response, the U.S. was much more forthcoming in its discussions on nuclear doctrine and nuclear use. And so by April, there was really a sea change in attitude by the South Korean government and a much greater sense of reassurance by the U.S. extended deterrence guarantee. But the jury is still out, as it were, that the U.S. has to implement greater steps towards reassuring South Korea. So really, we'll have to see the next 6 months or so how effective the U.S. is in reassuring our South Korean ally.
All right, I see. Now, Mr. Klingner, one more question. Staying on the Seoul-Washington alliance front, according to a recent Wall Street Journal report, Washington is planning to send its largest nuclear-armed submarine, the so-called Boomer, to South Korea. What's the difference between an SSBN and an SSGN, and what does it mean for an Ohio-class submarine to come to Korea for the first time in 4 decades?
Well, an SSGN would be carrying guided cruise missiles, and an SSBN would be carrying a very large submarine-launched ballistic missiles. And, sort of technically, when you put a boomer in port, you're degrading your deterrence because the effectiveness of the submarine is that it's out in the ocean. The North Koreans would not know where it is and therefore couldn't target it. By having it in port, you're unlikely to launch any missiles when you're in port. So it's degrading deterrence to some degree, but it's a way of trying to reassure South Korea of our commitment to defend South Korea with all available means, including potentially nuclear weapons. So the U.S. pledged that not only would we maintain the large-scale military exercises which resumed last year, but also increase the operational tempo of the deployment of strategic assets or nuclear-capable assets to either in or near South Korea. So it's a way of trying to show our commitment And the fact that we're putting a boomer in South Korean port for the first time in 4 decades is an attempt by the U.S. to further reassure our ally of our commitment. So we expect to see a lot more nuclear-capable bomber flights or dual-capable aircraft flights, either to or near South Korea during the coming year or years.
Right, so it's a way to reassure South Korea in terms of deterrence and in terms of commitment for South Korea. All right, now, Dr. Go, shifting gears a little bit here. Recently, Hyun Jung-un, the chairwoman of Hyundai Group, sought to visit North Korea's Kumgang Mountain to mark the 20th anniversary of her late husband's death. What historical background does Hyundai Group have that made them think about visiting North Korea?
Well, the name, very much the name itself, the Hyundai Asan. The Asan comes from the village in North Korea where the founder, the honorary founder of the Hyundai Group itself, Chung Ju-young, was born. So he actually used the name of his village where he was born as his pen name, Asan. So he uses, the Hyundai Group itself, whenever they conduct philanthropic businesses, they attach the name Asan to whatever those philanthropic projects. And then what he very much wanted to, at the later stage of his life, he very much wanted to dedicate himself to the reconciliation between the two Koreas. So the Hyundai Asan Group very much reflects this spirit of business of the founder himself. And so Hyundai as a group, and then the Hyundai Asan company invested quite a bit big capital, injected quite a big capital in starting economic exchanges with North Korea. There's the signature project happened to be the Kumgangsan tourism project. In fact, actually took place between 1998 and 2008. Hundreds of thousands of South Koreans visited Kumgang Mountain, which lies in the north of the DMZ in the North Korean side. And but then the tourism was suspended back in 2008 when a South Korean tourist was accidentally shot to death by North Korean guards. So, the tourism project has been in limbo since then, since 2008. And then because Kim Jong-un hasn't shown signs that he wanted to improve relationship with North Korea, he has in fact started dismantling some of the facilities that Hyundai Asan has set up in Kumgangsan. And in addition to that, North Korea has essentially tried to replace Hyundai's investments in Kumgang Mountain with the Chinese capital. So for Hyundai Group, this represents a major loss because Hyundai apparently has invested up to $800 million in that project. So I think this is the reason why the chairwoman Hyun wanted to pay a visit to North Korea to ensure that to actually maybe to convince North Korea not to carry out the steps to essentially dismantle the Hyundai's facilities in North Korea and then somehow try to rekindle the chance that North Korea might change mind and then allow Hyundai to continue to conduct business, but resume business in North Korea.
Right, so there were indeed ties between North Korea and Hyundai Group. Now, that being said, Dr. Go, what is the usual process if someone wishes to visit North Korea? And what do we know about how North Korea said no to Hyun's request?
So there are essentially two major steps. The first step is to snag an invitation from North Korea. So you have to apply for an invitation to the North Korean regime, either in the name of the party itself or one of the major institutions that acts as a front to deal with South Korea. But then I think this is a stage where Hyundai has been able to proceed with the planned visit because North Korea essentially refused to extend an invitation. Because hypothetically speaking, had a Hyundai chairperson had received this invitation from North Korea, then she could use the invitation to apply for a visit, permission to visit North Korea from the Ministry of Unification. And so this is the usual procedure. So you get an invitation first from North Korea. With the invitation, you go to the Ministry of Unification in South Korea, and then you get a permission to contact the North Korean nationals in North Korea while visiting the country, which might sound kind of ironic because if you are visiting North Korea, you have to meet with North Koreans.
Right.
But this is the reflection of the fact that North Korea, at least legally speaking, is not considered as a country but under the South Korean law. And then also North Korea is considered to be an organization that's anti-South Korea. So in order to have contacts or lawful contacts with this illegal organization, you need to have a very explicit permission from the South Korean government and also to contact with the North Korean nationals. That's the reason why you need to get the permission from the Ministry of Unifications.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Klingner, some experts point out that North Korea's rejection expressed through North Korea's foreign ministry is quite unusual, and it is very much similar to how East Germany treated the West. Now, what does this mean, and what are your thoughts on this?
Both Koreas consider themselves to be the sole representative of the Korean people on the peninsula. And up till now, both countries have used government agencies other than the foreign ministry for inter-Korean contact. And that's a reflection, as Dr. Go pointed out, that neither country sees it, or at least officially, as a different country, but instead just a part of its own country, either to the north or the south. So North Korea using the foreign ministry may be a signal that they are rejecting outreach to South Korea, that this is continuing their rejection of all forms of dialogue and engagement, not only with South Korea, but also the United States. So we're trying to interpret whether it's a signal of an end of dialogue or a firm rejection of dialogue by North Korea to the south, or it's just a way of indicating that they want some additional concessions from South Korea before they resume any kind of engagement with the South or with the United States.
I see your point. Now, Dr. Go, let's also talk about how South Korea sees North Korea right now. Along with the recent nomination of new unification minister Kim Myong-hyun, President Yoon said the ministry should stop being North Korea's support agency and called for changes. Now, in what direction is the ministry expected to go now?
Well, I think it's not just about the direction in which the Ministry of Unification will go from now. I think it's the entire direction of the North Korea policy under the new administration. I think the new administration wants to very much internationalize the North Korean issue. What I mean by this is that the existence of the Ministry of Unification actually indicates, I mean, it's a reflection of the fact that South Korea very much wanted to make a North Korean issue a national issue or at least an inter-Korean issue. Just between the two Koreas. So, but then this sounds logical on paper, but then he had quite a serious ramifications, negative ones too, which was the ignoring a very fundamental threats that North Korea presents, and also that's the fact that South Korea tended to ignore serious problems in North Korea, such as especially the human rights abuses. So what happened under this idea of making North Korean issue an inter-Korean issue, not an international issue, was that we would turn our blind eye to the challenges in North Korea, such as the nuclear program as well as the human rights abuses, and then we all South Korea tended to take this compartmentalized approach towards North Korea. So essentially, it's two parallel approaches where we will conduct dialogue with North Korea as if nothing is happening inside North Korea, with gross violation of human rights and repression and all that. But on the other hand, parallelly speaking, wanted to tell North Korea to say get rid of the nuclear weapons and so forth. And clearly, this was very contradictory in terms, and I think a lot of our allies and like-minded partners in the international community found this very illogical. So I think the new administration wants to essentially resolve this contradiction by making the Ministry of Unification more in touch with the reality on the ground in North Korea. So, but then there are detractors to this move, because it means that it sends a signal to North Korea that we are putting North Korea in the back burner, that it's no longer our priority for South Korea. But and then also many voices in South Korea sees this as an indication that the new administration is no longer interested in unification issue. But I think in truth, I think what's going on is that what I just told you, that the new administration wants to recognize the huge challenges that we face in North Korea, essentially with North Korea's illicit nuclear and the missile development program, as well as the gross violation of human rights issues. So I think the new administration is saying that we need to fix this first before we proceed with a more serious engagement with North Korea.
I see. Now, Mr. Klingner, so discussions are taking place over what role the unification ministry should play. What are your thoughts?
There are several roles the unification ministry can play. It's really been the main point of contact between the two Koreas, sort of a ministry of foreign affairs devoted solely to engagement with North Korea. So it's the main conduit for discussions or negotiations. It can also serve as the main point of contact within the South Korean government for planning for unification under various scenarios, whether it's after a war or a conflict, or whether it's a part of a federation or confederation, or a peaceful of North Korea. And then under progressive administrations, it's taken on an advocacy role of coming up with ideas of what benefits South Korea can provide to the North. And under the Go Myong-hyun and Moon Jae-in administrations, the ministry came up with a very long list of economic benefits that South Korea wanted to provide, perhaps even in defiance of international sanctions. And under the Moon Jae-in administration, the U.S. became so concerned about the outreach and the advocacy for benefits to North Korea that the U.S. government felt it necessary to directly contact South Korean banks, businesses, and government agencies to remind them of U.S. and international law constricting engagement or benefits to North Korea, and also the penalties for violating those sanctions. So I think the advocacy role is one that you usually see only under progressive governments, and it's, I think, has become too strong a role under progressive governments, where they're coming up with benefits without seeking some kind of reciprocal measures from North Korea, whether it's steps towards denuclearization or a cessation of military exercises or provocation. So I think the engagement with North Korea has to be conditional, and certainly any benefits that are provided to the North has to be compliant with international law and UN resolution sanctions.
Right, I see your point, and I hope the Unification Ministry could do that key role. All right, now unfortunately this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Go. And thank you, Mr. Klingner, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.